The man behind the modernization. The revolutionary behind the reforms. And the patriarch behind the party. Deng Xiaoping leads China into the modern world with hopes the country can regain its past glory as the Middle Kingdom, at least in economic and military terms. But his reforms are not without detractors and a price. Minor details, they seem, for a man who survives 3 purges. And it's this resilience that can be traced throughout Deng's life. August 22nd, 1904. Deng is born to a land-owning peasant family in Sichuan province. A time that also marks the demise of China's ancient empire, coming under siege by Western colonial powers. Just 15 years old, Deng packs his bags and leaves home for the industrial city of Chongqing.
And his father was not a rich, but a minor landlord, and he'd been educated and obviously had had plenty of food and exercise as a young man. And when he went, was made to work very hard in this factory, and he really saw how the poor lived.
He prepares for studies abroad, but finds himself swept up in the historic May 4th movement, the first political demonstration by Chinese intellectuals. 1920, Deng plows ahead with his work-study program in France, while Zhou Enlai leads a group of young Chinese intellectuals in setting up a European branch of the Chinese Socialist Youth League Corps.
Deng Xiaoping and Zhou Enlai had a very good relationship, which was based on their friendship, which was formed in Paris. Deng Xiaoping, there were many organizations to take Chinese students to France, and Deng Xiaoping, in fact, not only Zhou Enlai, I think, was already there, but Chairman Mao was going to France, but actually missed the boat at the last moment and then decided he wouldn't go. But Deng Xiaoping went with his young uncle, actually, and he was in a university and not learning Chinese, learning French, and suddenly they said they couldn't go on paying them, they'd run out of funds. And he got a job in a factory for a time, had to work very, very hard. Of course, he learnt more and more French as he was doing it. And then he gave up the hard work and went to Paris, where he met Zhou Enlai, and they became good friends in Paris.
He later joins the Chinese Communist Party. As Deng and the others study, in China, a united front is formed. The ruling Kuomintang joined forces with the communists to drive out warlords in northern China, to try to unite the country. The Communist Party summons Deng to return to help in the campaign. The move is a turning point for Deng. He becomes the political office chief at a military academy in Shainan. It marks the beginning of Deng's climb up the military and political career ladder. Deng's assistance in the United Front is short-lived, The effort unravels, with the nationalists turning on the communists. Despite this, the 23-year-old Deng is promoted to Central Secretariat of the Communist Party. He sets up a base in Guangxi. Within 2 years, Deng wins praise for his military savvy. He carries out successful campaigns against the nationalists. The communists strengthen their might. Deng's army divisions join Mao and Zhu De's forces in Jiangxi. In 1931, Mao finds himself in another battle, this time behind communist lines. Criticism is acute over his military strategy of building bases in the hinterland. Mao is ousted from his position, and with guilt by association, Deng becomes a casualty. He's also stripped of his title, that of propaganda chief. The 28-year-old experiences the first in a series of purges. Two years later, a 1 million strong nationalist invasion of the communist headquarters in Jiangxi leads to heavy losses. Winter 1934. The Long March begins. Shortly after, Deng is recovered by the party. He becomes the head of the Central Secretariat. His comeback, many say, is a result of his good relationship with Zhou, Mao's right-hand man. He is to become China's first premier later. Mao also reassumes his leadership, winning for the first time widespread support in the party. The expedition eventually reaches Shanxi, northern China. Japan, though, also makes its mark. Its imperial army invades 3 northern provinces. But General Chiang Kai-shek concentrates on crushing the Red Army rather than the invaders. Discontent over his stand ferments in the ranks. It subsequently leads to the Xianan Mutiny, the kidnapping of the Generalissimo. As Chiang is forced to cooperate with the communists to fight the Japanese, the Red Army reorganizes. Deng becomes the deputy chief of the political office and later the head of the 129th Army Corps. He and military chief Liu Bo-cheng successfully build their anti-Japanese contingents. But Deng's successes aren't confined to the battlefield. In 1940, he marries Zhou Lin, his third wife, who survives him. 5 years later, Deng climbs another rung on the political ladder. He's elected to the party's Central Committee at the 7th Party Congress held in Yunnan. Here, Mao establishes himself as party leader. After the Sino-Japanese conflict, a full-fledged civil war rages. Chiang Kai-shek's government eventually collapses. Nationalists flee the country for Taiwan. October 1949, Mao announces the birth of a nation. Deng is on hand for the momentous event, but it seems before the celebrations go into full swing, he heads for southwest China to join his troops in wiping out remnant forces of the Nationalist Party. 1952, the year Deng starts his meteoric rise. He becomes the vice premier of the State Council. At the 8th Party Congress 4 years later, the party's secretary-general job goes to Deng, along with an impressive spot in the party's pecking order. Deng holds the country's 6th top job. In 1957, Mao tells Nikita Khrushchev not to underestimate Deng, the little fellow. He's highly intelligent, Mao says, and he has a great future ahead of him. The government kicks off an economic campaign. It nationalizes major sectors of the economy. On the political front, Mao launches the infamous 100 Flowers movement, allowing open criticism of government. Later, Deng executes Mao's orders to mobilize the anti-rightist campaign, to intimidate and silence unsuspecting enemies, the intellectuals. The Great Leap Forward becomes a great step backwards. The establishment of agricultural communes and the push for industrial production backfire. A ruined economy and subsequent drought result in thousands and perhaps millions dying from starvation. Deng and Liu Shaoqi are given the unenviable task of healing the economy. The communes are dissolved. Farmers are given permission to sell produce in the markets, and incentive schemes are established to improve workers' productivity. And it's this period Deng engages in pragmatism. He says, be it a white or black cat, so long as it catches the mice, a saying that vindicates the changes. And another change? Mao retires in 1959 and Liu takes over the chairmanship. Mao, though, continues his grip on power. He's later suspicious of Deng and Liu's success on the economic front. He thinks a capitalist revival is in the works. Mao's answer? The Cultural Revolution. His wife, Jiang Qing, orchestrates the campaign. In 1966, the terror and castigation start. Deng falls from grace. He's branded as public enemy number 2, a capitalist roader. Deng survives the reign of terror, living under house arrest. His family escapes virtually unscathed, except for his son, Deng Pufang. Red Guards throw him off a 4-story building. The attack leaves him paralyzed for life.
Was his safety ever in doubt?
I should think so, certainly it was. During his last period of being in disgrace, after all, you remember, his son, during the Cultural Revolution, was thrown out of a window and has remained a cripple. There was some danger, but not great danger. I mean, the Long March wasn't a picnic, you know. There was a certain amount of danger in the Long March. And, but by and large, on the whole, I think Deng knew he was very canny and very sensible and never took ridiculous risks. But as you know, I mean, he could have been, if his son was thrown out of the window, they could have done the same to him if they'd had the chance.
But Liu is dealt a more tragic fate. In 1968, he is permanently expelled from the party. Liu is incarcerated and dies in prison. Deng survives the madness that sweeps the country because of his good relations, many believe, with Mao and Premier Zhou. In 1971, Lin Biao, Mao's right-hand man, is killed in a dubious plane crash. Deng requests to be given some work.
One knew that Deng had been in disgrace, but one didn't know then, I learnt later, that he had been working semi-secretly for Premier Zhou Enlai, helping him with the administration of the party and really of the country, this enormous country, because Zhou, again very secretly, had learnt that he'd got cancer, and he had been an enormously hard worker, but didn't know until then that he'd got cancer. And of course Zhou Enlai gradually handed over his duties to Deng Xiaoping. Not all of them, but the day-to-day stuff.
2 years later, he makes his second comeback. With the help of the premier, Deng becomes an aide in the State Council.
1973, he returned unexpectedly to certainly the foreigners there when the Premier Zhou Enlai, who gave a banquet in the Great Hall of the People in honor of Prince Sihanouk. And in those days, foreign correspondents were invited, they're not now, to all the major state banquets in the Great Hall of the People. And I, as one of the very few correspondents in Peking, had been invited. And when I got to the Great Hall of the People, Ma Yu-chen, who is now a vice minister and secretary of the State Council, and after that was ambassador in London, got hold of a few of us and said, "Look out tonight, you'll see a small man with a great deal of energy and personality will be coming to the top table, and he is none other than Deng Xiaoping, who was the party secretary and who's been in disgrace for some time." And sure enough, a little man running with his hands going up and down came into the ring, and everybody looked at him, and he took his place at the high table. And in fact, very few of the ambassadors present took any little notice of poor old Sihanouk. Their eyes were entirely concentrated on this dynamic personality of Deng Xiaoping.
Lin Biao's death, though, leads to a power struggle between the Gang of Four and Premier Zhou. Deng helps Zhou fend off the gang led by Mao's wife. In 1975, with the help of Zhou, he's appointed vice chairman of the Military Commission and the vice premier of the State Council. As a counter-offensive to Deng's ascension, the Gang of Four launches an anti-Deng movement that's veiled as an anti-rightist campaign.
Mao's wife, Shan Xin, never liked Deng Xiaoping. She, as you know, was, although she was something of a playgirl in private life, in public life, and I think genuinely politically, she was very left in the Chinese Communist Party, whereas Deng was more pragmatic. And so she was always jealous of him, and in some ways, I presume, when she and Mao were alone together, she didn't say very nice things about him. Of course, one doesn't know, but it's generally assumed that she did not. She and her, who later became the Gang of Four, her left-wing friends, didn't like Deng.
January 1976. The sun sets on the premier for the last time. Deng loses not only a friend, but also a crucial supporter for his place in the party. Several months later, citizens go to Tiananmen Square to mourn Zhou's death. It develops into a protest against the regime. Bloodshed ensues as the military crushes the demonstration. The incident is blamed on Deng. He's branded a party pariah and is stripped of all of his posts. Deng, an avid bridge player, finds the deck is stacked against him for the third and what will be the last time in his career. September 1976, a pivotal time for China and the world. Chairman Mao dies along with the Gang of Four's hope of taking over.
When Mao Zedong died, they were still at the peak of power. Zhang Jing, Mao's wife, Yao Wenhuan, Mao's ghostwriter, Zhang Junzhao, Mao's top propagandist, and Wang Hongwen, Mao's favorite young leader. Less than a month later, the four had disappeared.
The military leadership arrests the notorious members.
通过筹划我、筹划毛泽东主席、筹划1万人民参加的无产阶级文化大革命啊！生的时候，唯一留在前方追随毛泽东主席的，只有我一个女同志。你们躲到哪儿去了？
They were real schemers, and they were extremely anxious to get rid of Deng, and she had always been deeply opposed to Deng.
The gang's demise paves the way for Deng's final rehabilitation and eventual recovery of all of his posts. On his priority list, getting China back on her feet. In 1978, Deng's open-door policy is hailed at the 11th Party Congress. He wins accolades worldwide and eventually 2 covers on Time magazine as the Man of the Year. In 1979, Deng arrives in the U.S. Capitol for a historic visit. He takes over the premiership from Hua Guofeng in 1980. He appoints Hu Yaobang to party general and Zhao Ziyang to premier of the state council.
What made him become a survivor throughout all these purges?
Because he stayed in the background at the right moment and came forward when there seemed to be a vacant space. He was politically, he's very alert and very clever, but not malicious and not. He didn't stab people in the back. He was basically, I think, he appeared to have this enormous personality, but with it he was kind and intelligent.
Despite fortifying support for himself, Deng is the target of attacks during the Democracy Wall movement. Reforms are confined to the economic arena, but they fuel false hopes freedoms may be achieved elsewhere. Democracy leaders are arrested, and expression through big character posters are banned from the Constitution. A tightrope situation for the leader. He attempts to quiet his critics while he encourages economic openness.
全面开创社会主义现代化建设新局面而奋斗的纲领。2. 审议和通过新的中国共产党章程。3. 按照新的党章的规定，选举新的中央委员会。
And a new slogan is applauded. Socialism with Chinese characteristics, Deng's trademark phrase. It's a guise for streamlining bureaucracy and the leadership by replacing old cadres for younger ones.
I also, of course, it was part of my job, followed his political career very carefully, what he was saying, what he was doing, because what he was saying mattered. That was Chinese policy, or rapidly became it. I was interested in him as a man who didn't appear to have any particular virtues. I mean, he was not outstanding in charm. He was not outstanding as an orator. He was not outstanding as a theoretician on paper. He wasn't impressive to look at. He didn't have any obvious virtues or qualities, and yet here he was, the leader and the undisputed leader of the most populous country in the world and one of the most powerful. He was also a most successful leader of that country. He'd set it on a path of economic development which was extremely effective and rapid, and he'd brought China into the world in a way that it hadn't been before.
Special economic zones are set up, while more than a dozen coastal cities open up for business.
In 1973, when I used to cross the border, and it had no shops, nothing. Now, this village with under 3,000 people now has 3.5 million.
Farmers are allowed to sell surplus produce in the free market, while enterprises are given more autonomy. That's autonomy in economic terms. Politically, the grip on dissent tightens. Deng launches an anti-spiritual campaign against the literati and the intellectuals. And the future of Hong Kong's freedom is in question as Britain's lease of the territory starts to wind down.
Mrs. Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping recognized that the other was in the background with the overriding authority. And that was quite important because we were able at critical points in the talks to say to the Chinese and to Deng Xiaoping, my Prime Minister has now been persuaded that we should do this. So her authority and his authority were important components. The negotiations didn't really start until Margaret Thatcher saw Deng Xiaoping in September '82, and he then imposed his let's get it done in 2 years. So we had from '82 to '84, and we worked at it very, very hard. The number of people working on Hong Kong in the Foreign Office during that time multiplied 8-fold.
The Hong Kong issue is to become a milestone for Deng. He insists China will resume sovereignty come 1997.
We started saying, look, keep British administration, keep Hong Kong's way of life. And we got some extremely helpful sentences from Deng Xiaoping. His one country, two systems proposition was a very, very imaginative insight. And from those half-dozen sentences, we were able, with Chinese partnership, to work out a document that was as full and as comprehensive as any constitution I've known. I've seen the poor countries of Eastern Europe, Ukraine, for example, struggling to create a constitution that was half as good.
British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's hopes to get an extension are dashed. And in 1984, what becomes official is Hong Kong's return to Chinese sovereignty.
And I'm particularly pleased to see that Chairman Deng Xiaoping is able to be present. The joint declaration on the future of Hong Kong, which we have just signed on behalf of our two governments, is a landmark in the life of the territory.
In 1984, the joint declaration is signed. Deng drinks to not only the signing, but also the one country, two systems concept designed for Hong Kong.
Many people on the Chinese side used to attribute to him the concept of one country, two systems. And it may well be that it was his concept. though I think it was first applied, whether it was his or not, to Taiwan and not to Hong Kong and Macau. He certainly, during 1983 and 1984, took a close, even a passionate interest in what was going on in the negotiation. In fact, he actually said to one of his visitors in 1984, these last 2 years, or this year, I've been concerned with two big things. One is law and order. It was a year of one of the periodic crackdowns on crime. Law and order and Hong Kong. I think he was very much concerned, and during both his visits to China, Sir Geoffrey Howe, as he then was, saw Deng Xiaoping as the last and most important of his meetings, and important business was transacted at those meetings, and Deng Xiaoping was quite clearly on top of his subject.
And I remember when we were talking, for example, about the first stages of the Joint Liaison Group, as to whether it should meet in London or in Hong Kong or Beijing or all three. And I said, well, it may be possible for us to compromise. And he reached out, shook me by the hand and said, right, we've done a deal. And I said, no, hang on, we haven't. But he was very keen to drive home his advantage and very skillful. And as I say, his one country, two systems insight. He talked to me about that as a possible way of solving the problems of the two Germanys, as a possible way of solving the problems of the two Koreas. And he was a thoughtful man, but of course a tough man, a Chinese leader who'd been through fearful suffering himself, trying to put together China as the great nation that it is. So I was dealing, if you like, with a short, male Chinese Thatcher. I dealt with Margaret Thatcher as a very tough leader myself and knew the need for tough leadership. I knew that I was talking to a determined leader then.
Deng further highlights his other economic plans during the 35th anniversary of the establishment of the People's Republic of China.
我们的经济获得了空前的蓬勃发展，其他工作也都得到了公认的成就。今天，全国人民无不感到兴奋和自豪。
But reforms raise again false hopes democracy may bloom in the process. Compounding the calls is the side effect of a fast-growing economy, inflation. Student protests break out in 1986. It prompts Deng to start the anti-liberal movement. His hand-picked successor, Hu, is dumped for his freewheeling ways for change. Zhao replaces Hu. In 1987, Deng gives up all of his posts, but he hangs on to the chairmanship of the Central Military Commission. Hu dies in 1989. His death sparks a wave of mourners and later protests against the regime. Summertime, protests in the heart of the capital. Deng tries to ignore the demonstrations as Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev visits Beijing.
За здоровье Раисы Максимовны. За здоровье всех советских товарищей, которые здесь присутствуют. За
Outside, a cacophony of dissent mars Gorbachev's visit. Deng believes the demonstrations are a personal attack and a threat to the government's stability.
I think he made up his mind pretty early on, say by the 25th of April, by the time the movement and the demonstrations had been going on for about 10 days. They lasted, after all, for 7 weeks. He'd made up his mind that this was threatening. This movement was threatening to the political system in China and to political stability in China, and must be resisted. I think he made up his mind very fast. I think it could be argued that if he had not been alive, that the outcome of the movement would have been different. Concessions would have been made to the students. It was fairly nicely balanced at the top, except for Deng Xiaoping, who came in quite hard on the side of, well, you can say repression, but at the beginning it wasn't so much repression, it was resistance.
Despite having given up most of his posts, it's clear who's in charge.
我们在13届一中全会有正式的决定，虽然这个决定没有公布啊，但是它是一个非常重要的决定。民主万岁！民主万岁！自由万岁！我们在这台湾了。
The crackdown shocks the world. The dramatic events cast doubt on the future of the country, but it seems Deng is unaffected.
我提议大家齐力为所难得的人们默哀。
We are all responsible for what we do, and we can't put the clock back, and China will have to live with Tiananmen. And its new leaders will have to live with the legacy of Tiananmen. It's a very difficult dilemma which is faced by people in these countries. The formula was, Deng's formula, that you would have economic growth within a framework of political obedience, tight political control. Now there are obvious contradictions there, and they were shown up in June of 1989.
The crackdown's post-mortem is less sympathetic. His decade-old crusade to bring China into the modern world comes to a halt. Foreign countries think twice about investing. Reforms are sent into a tailspin as conservative enemies sabotage innovative economic programs.
Britain, along with all other Western countries, took various measures, as you know, after Tiananmen, in order to express the sense of revulsion which was felt by public opinion and parliamentary opinion at what had happened. So there were things like cancellation of high-level visits and end of military cooperation and so on. And understandably enough, China resented that. And China would always said, we have done nothing against you, why are you doing something against us? Similarly, there came a great change in the attitudes of Chinese leaders towards Hong Kong people, and a change in the attitudes of Hong Kong people towards China at that time. Suddenly the Chinese leaders discovered that the Hong Kong people were political animals to the extent that they demonstrated in very large numbers in favour of those students and workers in Tiananmen Square, and then against what had happened afterwards.
Repercussions are also felt in Hong Kong. Confidence after 1997 is shaken. As communist regimes collapse, conservative leaders tighten their political grip. To avoid facing the same music. In early 1991, Deng journeys to Shanghai. He extols the virtues of reform. His next stop the following year is Shenzhen, the showpiece of his reform campaign. There, he tells his audience he sees all of China as an open frontier for foreign investments.
中国的时候，只要不搞社会主义，不搞开放、改革开放、发展经济，逐步的改善人民的生活，这个路都是任何一条路都是死路。
Deng's rare public appearances, though, cast doubts on the country's patriarch and politics.
从我自己来观察，我父亲是非常放心他们现在对于中国的政治和这个大政方针的这种运作的。
She writes a biography of her father as other family members dispel rumors of his state.
他的祝寿呢都没有，从来没有大张旗鼓的做个寿，都是家人在一起团聚一下就行了。
Deng begins to take on a cult status as a media blitz attempts to bolster his popularity. Exhibits are kicked off, but human rights advocates believe the real pictures of Deng's reforms aren't being shown, with China's continual crackdown on dissidents and its human rights record far from being desirable. And then there's another exhibit. This time, the government releases an old photo of Deng. It was taken in October 1995.
和平先生的身体健康的，至于他春节前是不是在电视上出现，这个我们就是无法估计。
Deng doesn't make an appearance, not even for his 92nd birthday in late August, but that doesn't deter celebrations throughout China.
哎呦，我感谢这个小朋友活，这个越岁数大越好，越多回家越好，希望他身体健康，希望他明年呢这个拿他这个归回中国，这是香港，希望他到那儿去参观。是。
However, that's unlikely, according to Beijing officials, who tell journalists at a New Year's reception that it would be quite difficult for Deng to come to Hong Kong, adding that even catching a cold would be a big illness for someone over 90 years old. Deng's image, though, and thoughts prove ageless as China's propaganda machine goes into full gear, immortalizing the leader, even on celluloid.
这蝗虫不是1只2只。 而是上亿只啊！还有别的办法吗？
And as the world prepares to ring in 1997, reports abound in Hong Kong that Deng had been hospitalized at Beijing's No. 301 military hospital.
邓小平同志光辉的革命历程，表现了他在中国革命和建设的长期历史进程中。
Although the reports remain unconfirmed, China's central television station's launching of a documentary on Deng's life on New Year's Day convinces many that Beijing has prepared for a new era.
和第二代中央领导集体的核心，是我国国族人民公认的享有崇高威望的杰出领导人。他在中国革命和建设的各个历史时期，都做出了重大贡献。
The 10-hour, 12-part documentary takes 4 years to produce, but it may take even longer to know the full impact his life will have on China. With just over 4 months to go before Hong Kong reverts to Chinese sovereignty, ill health claims not only Deng's life, but also his dream of one day coming to the territory to witness the historic event which he played such a major role in.
Well, I think he'll be remembered as a very great man, and he undoubtedly was. He followed a very turbulent period. Mao was a great Chinese leader, no doubt, but he was not one to build the foundations of the country's economic success, whereas the Deng reforms have been the basis for China's enormous economic advance over the last 10, 15 years. And he has given the country stability, economic progress, and put it on its way to becoming a superpower. And I think these are very great achievements, particularly coming from one who was brought up as a fierce revolutionary, as he was.
He was remembered as a hero of the as a man who had the guts and things to run a communist magazine in Paris. He'll be remembered as a friend and, if you like the word, disciple of Zhou Enlai. He'll be remembered as a man who faced the Long March. He lost his wife on the Long March at the beginning, and he who then suffered various periods of disgrace due in some measure, certainly latterly, to the wife of the Jiang Jing, who had terrific power as the wife of Chairman Mao. And then he will be remembered as a ruler of integrity.
I think he'll be remembered by the majority of Chinese, those who were very, very poor 20 years ago, are still poor today, but much less poor, as someone who rescued them from poverty. Now there will be large sectors of Chinese society, the intellectuals, the students, perhaps some of the white-collar workers, both inside the party and outside it, who will have doubts about his legacy to China and be ashamed, perhaps, of what happened in 1989, or resentful. But I think the majority of the Chinese will see him, to put it in its simplest terms, as a good thing for China.
Deng is survived not only by his family, but also his legacy. It will live on, but just how he'll be saluted remains to be seen. Will he be judged for his unprecedented reforms, or for his part in the Tiananmen tragedy? No one knows for sure, but one thing is certain: Deng helped shape China to make it what it is today. His reforms will span for years and perhaps generations to come. It's a feat likely to secure Deng a place in history as one of the most influential leaders of modern time.